Hello? Hi everyone, can you hear me? Oh, interesting, I see. Can you hear me, Christy? Hello? Okay, great. Thank you. I'm not sure. I've been having some technical issues. Okay, you can hear me. Can you see the screen okay too? I know there's a delay in the commenting, so let's see. Perfect. Thank you. Christy's comment. So I'm just gonna wait a few minutes. I know people are joining, and if you're like me, you have technical difficulties too. And so I'll wait a few minutes, and then I will also be waiting for a cue from Christy as well. So thank you for helping as a moderator. I think maybe here too in the beginning, just take some of this time before more people join, as we wait for people to join. But I did really want to say how excited I am about this talk, not only this talk, but the fact that there is a series occurring, the fact that you guys are on the call, on the video listening, and basically the fact that we have this going in Belize. It is really, really inspiring for me, and really energizing, and really long overdue. So I think the conversation on special needs in general in Belize is too quiet, and therefore the awareness of our general population, the services that are available, and basically then the support from everybody around us is at a stage where we can really grow as a community. And so starting this with the Autism Awareness Month kickoff and focusing at least first on autism in our special needs world, I think is so great. Unfortunately, also just to mark these times, let's just say this is COVID-19 era. So unfortunately, all the other events that Christy had worked so hard to plan for this month had to be delayed. But my understanding is that they will still be happening later in the year. So that is really good. And I trust that we will have great participation in those. But just really inspiring. I think as a Belizean who doesn't currently live in Belize, it's just been something I've seen as a dream, as a wish. And so I did want to just right now just really acknowledge Christy. Thank you for setting up this site. Thank you for starting this conversation and for organizing this series of amazing speakers that we've had this month. So thank you for that. So I'll just go ahead and kick off. Okay, thank you. And apologies because I'm trying to do this on my new iPad and learning Facebook Live too. Okay. So my name is Elisa Franklin. I am a Belizean. I grew up in Belize, did everything through sixth form, and then I moved to the US for school and ended up staying in the US. So I am currently based in Houston, Texas, but my family basically still lives in Belize, and I visit regularly. So I am here today to talk to you about, I'll say it slowly, Anat Baniel method, NeuroMovement. Anat Baniel is a person, and so I'll talk about the method, the basis of it, a little bit of just very briefly the evolution of it, how it works, as we would say, the principles on which it's based, and then I will dive into what we call the 9 essentials, which are basically the principles behind the work. So they are what drive a practitioner in decision making in an individual session with a client, so with a child or with an adult. But more importantly, they are essentials that you can apply in daily life as a parent, that you can apply as a teacher working really with any child, but even more so importantly with children with special needs, and or as a therapist, in your specialty, doing what you do, and whatever your profession is, but the manner in which you execute your skill can also make a big difference for the child. So these are also principles that can be applied in those situations, and then generally for anybody in the child's life, caregivers, grandparents, anybody else. If we can influence more of this thinking, I've found that it is very, very helpful for the kiddos. So I will talk about that, because those are things that hopefully you at least get an idea of. We'll only be able to go over them really, really quickly. I'll list some, but I'll point you to resources where you can find out more. Okay. And then I wanted to just spend a few minutes talking about my own situation. I am a mother to a child with special needs, multiple disabilities, and one of his diagnoses is ASD. Okay, so I'll tell you a bit more about my story. And then we'll have time at the end for some questions. All right, so I'll just start to move through that. So the principles of ABM And the work really calls upon the power of the brain to change. Okay, so there's a point at which I'll flip to a couple of slides, but for the most part, I won't be showing anything. So basically, you all may have heard about the term brain plasticity. The brain is plastic. The brain can change. So this is today pretty well known, but in terms of medicine and neuro research, neuroscience, it's really new. So really just the past couple of decades where this thinking has become more mainstream and where there's agreement amongst neurologists that this is the case. So at one point it was believed that the brain was hardwired. Certain things had to happen in the brain in sequence, things like that. And now we just know that that is not true. So the ability of the brain to change structurally and functionally in relationship to the experience of that person is what we call upon in this work in a big way to be able to elicit changes in the child. Okay. So basically, given the right opportunities and the right conditions, that is what creates the chance for a child with autism, for example, for their brain to start operating at a different level, to be able to form new connections, which is called learning. That's what we call learning, but really it's new connections that have been formed in the brain. And that is what we're trying to get at. So through the principles, and you can employ those in your, like I said, every day. You don't have to be a practitioner to do it. And then definitely when it comes to kind of the one-on-one work that we would do with the children as a practitioner, that is what we're calling upon in its entirety. So who's Anat Baniel? She's Israeli, and she studied under a gentleman by the name of Moshe Feldenkrais, also Israeli. So actually, if you Google Feldenkrais, you would find Feldenkrais practitioners, people who do this work, because he trained many people, not just Anat. But Feldenkrais was kind of like a genius in his time. So he was, I think, a doctorate in physics. He was an inventor. He was a judo master. So like one of these people, like really good at many different things. And he loved soccer. And he hurt his knee, playing soccer. And it really drove him down a quest, like wondering why wasn't it healing? Like why wasn't it getting back to just regular function, just like the other knee? And so he really dove into that and worked to develop this method. So this was back, in the late 50s. He definitely got that it was about the brain. At that time, like I said, there was no research, neuroscience, all that stuff to support any of this, but he got that it was about the brain, and that if he could help the brain change, it could help him fully heal. So that's how he developed the method, looking very closely at infants and young children, because that is where it is. That is where we'd go through like so much learning, as you know, like the early days, months, and years of our life are just explosive with learning as you look at, the children around you, for example. So that's what he did, and his work has been applied in neurology and psychology, in performing arts, in sports, in rehab, in many, many different areas. And Anat studied with him. She started very early. She was a clinical psychologist and statistician. But she kind of wasn't feeling that work, like especially like the psychology piece wasn't explaining for her, just wasn't making enough sense of getting to the changes in the brain. So she was just looking for some other ways of eliciting brain change and explaining how it worked. And so she actually knew Feldenkrais through her father from early on, and so she was able to start to train with him. So she was very close to him, trained with him, studied with him, helped him develop advanced curriculums, and then be a trainer. So with his blessing, and because he noticed when she was working with children, she had like a particular gift. So that is something that even after his death in the early 80s, she really has pushed and evolved the thinking on that. And this is kind of, and evolved it and has her own branded method of Anat Baniel method. Okay, so that's kind of the genesis of the work. So she's been doing this for over 40 years. She has a book, it's called Kids Beyond Limits. So I'll talk about that later too, but I really encourage you to read it. I believe there's an electronic version on Amazon. But really, really helpful and lays out the essentials. So that's kind of the background of that. So in terms of how does ABM work, like I said, we're calling upon the power of the brain to notice differences. Okay, the moment at which the brain perceives a difference is the moment at which we have a possibility of a new connection being made. And so it's kind of as simple as that in terms of what it is that we're going for. We're going for the brain noticing a difference over and over and over, as many differences as possible, because that's what's happening in the infant's mind, in the infant's brain when they develop. It's like crazy, like the amounts of connections that they're forming because they're getting different inputs, they're having all their little experiences, and in a healthy child, they're able to perceive those differences that then become grooved in as connections, okay? And eventually they become bigger things in terms of what we see. The child rolls over, the child smiles at you, the child waves, the child crawls, the child says their first word, etc. Okay? But in between that, from the moment they're born, there are like trillions of little experiences that are allowing the brain to notice differences, and the brain then integrates those. Okay? So what we do then with ABM, also called NeuroMovement, movement for the brain, is we use movement as as a way to get the brain to notice a difference. So that is on I see it on two levels. One, movement is how, like neurologically, is the foundation of how the brain first perceives differences. So infants, healthy infants, they move, they twitch, all those things, they're random and they are so needed. I think even Lisa said yesterday, right, the stories of kids in orphanages maybe who aren't held enough, or really they just don't have a variety of experiences. They could have a different trajectory in terms of development, and not just movement wise, but later skills as well, speech, thinking, etc. So we call upon that because that is the mechanism for humans. There's neuroscience now that has tons of research on rats, for example, where they've done this, and they can show the linkage between the importance of movement and develop various areas of the brain. Okay, and so the second level then is that we as practitioners, we can move you, right? So I can move a child's arm or head or a bone or a combination of body parts. I cannot go in and tinker with somebody's speech center in their brain, right? I cannot go in and touch somebody's emotional regulator. But it doesn't matter because the brain controls all of that. So through movement, if we can have the brain in the mode of noticing differences, then the brain is in learning mode. It has the chance to be making connections, so it can be learning. What that means is that it's connecting neuron by neuron by neuron by neuron, and those newly connected neurons can talk to others. And so very often, like we do sessions, NeuroMovement, and different things happen with the child. I mean, the parents may report the child sleeps better, they may make a new sound, they may try a new food, who knows? And it's not like we were working on that thing. So that's kind of a little bit of a difference from some of the more traditional therapies, which working on speech, working on fine motor skills, etc. But I think even again, as Lisa's conversation just yesterday pointed out, you can work on different things and you see outcomes in other areas, right? And in our world, this is why. It's because if the brain is operating at a higher level and doing its job, and the job of the brain is to put order in the disorder and make sense out of the nonsense. And for a child with autism and a child with other special needs for varying reasons, there's an interruption in that ability of the brain to do that kind of on its own. And that's where we step in and try to help the brain be a better brain, and trust that it then goes to optimize the experience of that child, of that system. Okay. So with that, I am going to move on to the 9 essentials, and I will I'll switch my screen there. Okay, so I'll talk about this, and then hopefully this works. Let's see. All right. Okay, so the 9 essentials. As I said before, these are the principles that we employ in a one-on-one session with the children. And these are principles you can employ as a parent, as a teacher, as a therapist, as a person in the child's life, that the more and more that you understand these and can apply, the more and more the child has those opportunities for perception of difference, and you can elicit changes. Okay, so let's go through them. So the first one is movement with attention. As it says here, bringing attention to movement, you can have possibilities for new learning and transformation. And automatic and repetitive movements are things that we already know how to do, right? So our brain already knows how to do them. We may do them intentionally, we may do them not intentionally when it comes down to repetition, okay? But this is in the one-on-one side, like where we really kind of have an in terms of doing the hands-on. But you can do things even as you talk your child through movement. Call their attention to what they're doing, or even if you just name it, that is a way of bringing attention to what your child might be doing. Okay, so just note that as you're doing various activities, and like for example, like pushing activities, pulling activities, you can name what the child's doing. Like, are they pushing softly? Are they pushing hard? For example, these kinds of things, as simple as they sound, again, it's about how do we bring perception of difference into the equation of the brain so that it has a chance to learn. Slow. So fast, we do only what we already know, right? That is in terms of being able to do it well. So if we can do it slow, our brain has more room to perceive the difference, and therefore the chance to perform new neural patterns. And so this is really important. One very clear way of even just trying this is in speaking, right? So I tend to speak pretty quickly. I think in general in Belize we speak pretty quickly, actually. So even just slowing down what you say can make a difference for some kids. So a lot of times we have the assumption that the child, because they understand certain things or they react to certain things, we have an assumption that they are hearing as we're hearing and getting all the pieces of our sentence, etc. But we really don't know that to be true. So you'd be amazed in how even like slowing speech can have an outcome. Making sentences shorter along with that can also have an outcome. But even just slowing down what you're doing. So if a child is going to draw a square, for example, literally you can bring this in, like just, okay, draw the square, they draw it however they draw it. It may or may not be a square, for example, or it's with whatever speed that they do it. And you can, again, employ your language in that, okay, like draw it slower. You can model it, like you draw it fast, and then you're like, okay, now I'll draw it slowly. And now let's see if we can draw it even more slowly. So these are some of the things that you can do as a parent, again, anybody in the child's life, but really just think through either activities that the child is doing, or parts of the day, like when I say, just the regular life activities. So, for example, changing clothes. If you have a child who's learning to put on their clothes, or even if they already know how to put on their clothes, it's an opportunity to maybe engage with that child there and make it a thing, like make it like fun, or but like, okay, let's do this. Put on, put the shirt on over the head quickly. Put it on slowly. Find these opportunities to do it. And again, in the simplicity of it, sometimes people feel like, oh my gosh, I don't know, like I don't understand this, or rolling their eyes. But if you get what the experience is for the brain, then you can understand the power in this and why it can elicit some very huge changes over time as the brain starts to operate at a different level. So just think about that, opportunities where you can bring that in. And even if you're addressing the child, right? Even if you're addressing the child, you can do that too. Like slow it down, like slow down the process of putting the sleeve on, for example. Yeah, like really slowly up the arm, etc. So those are just a few examples, but slow can be applied in many different situations. And it's not that you want to do everything slow, please, if a car is coming, jump out of the way, okay? But just see where you can build in some opportunities for that. And it's also a bit of variation, which is important for the brain, and the third essential. Variation is hugely important for the experience of the brain to build and to learn. Like so very important. So on this one, like really try to provide various opportunities where the brain can experience variation. This can be in movement, this can be in actions that are happening, this can be in thoughts or emotions. You can probe at it with words, and with certain kids, depending on, what where they are on the spectrum, for example. But variation. So for example, like if you're working on writing, can you put the sheet of paper on a clipboard, and instead of just sitting at the desk and writing, so let's say the child is not yet writing all the letters, or they don't write on the line, for example, various things like that you may experience, or they're not writing clearly, doesn't matter. So move it away from the words, make it shapes, make it something else that might be easier, and then flip it on its head. So put it on a clipboard, have the child stand up, put the clipboard on the floor, have the child bend over in that position and draw the letter or write. Have the child lie down, hold the clipboard over above their head, like towards the ceiling, have them do it that way, twist it on the left, twist it on the right, things like that. And it's really incredible. I've seen like incredible videos of Anat working with children on some of like these things with writing, and the changes that the parents reported not too long after are really astounding. So just like kind of be creative. It's not like you would pass a whole 10 minutes doing something like that, but take 5 minutes, try to do that. Even I'm trying to get some themes and then just give different examples around those. But on variation, like even if it's a younger kid, like drawing shapes, or even it doesn't matter if it's the older kid, like you can even get them to do that, but draw a shape using your knee, Like, can you bend your knee up in the air and draw a square? For example, you could take that a step further. You could literally put paint on the knee. You could put shop paper on the wall, and you could have them draw a square, draw a circle, things like that. So calling upon variation, and again, makes the brain wake up, right? It wakes up to the differences. And you may have heard even just there are recommendations for adults, even just like as you go to work. A lot of us tend to have certain routes, maybe, where this is what we do, you know, what we do first, this is what we do second, and this is the specific route that we take to work for whatever reason. And there are examples out there where there have been studies too to just recommend that folks do different routes. Just take one day. I mean, even though you know you're doing it, like, but do it. Like, just go around a different block, for example. Even those things for an adult, a brain that hasn't been interrupted, so typically developing person, can really help you with your thinking, with your cognition, with energy levels, with just a myriad of things. It's really incredible. So so variation, very, very important. And it really, if you think about it, not that hard to do. We just don't often spend the time to stop and think about it. I'll just say one thing here, because also sometimes, and not just with children with special needs, but you know, in our societies and in the Western world, like our typical schooling methods, for example, we have a way of schooling, right? We have curriculums, we have the way it goes with classrooms, for example. Let's come back to slow. We have timed tests, and what we know for sure is that kind of structure and that kind of timing, for example, doesn't work for everybody, right? We know that. So certain children do well in that, and maybe we feel can learn into that, and then for others it just doesn't work. It just doesn't work. And so there, you know, I really implore upon you to just kind of shift a little and say, okay, maybe how could we vary X or Y to still meet the intent of the learning, but to shake it up a little bit. And it's beneficial not just for, again, a child with special needs or with autism in this case, but for any brain. So any child in a school setting can benefit from variation and really all these essentials. Subtlety. So subtlety is about, you know, we talk about it like in terms of reducing the force. So reducing force in movement is clear, and when we're doing ABM, generally it's very gentle. Touch is very light. Movements can be very small, to the point that the first time we went, my son's father was like, I don't know why we're here. She's not doing anything, for example. But really, it is about, that's typically a different experience for the brain. Like going way softer. It gives the chance, it generally, again, if we're talking about movement, at least on the movement side, it goes with slow, because generally if we're going softer, we're going a bit slower, although that doesn't always have to be the case. This also means going small, so smaller amplitude. So same thing like when we're moving, or if I ask people to raise their hands, generally for the most part, the hands just shoot up in the air. Like it's like boom, right? Like we're executing the action that we were asked to do. But really there are so many different trajectories to be able to raise the hand, and you could just raise the hand a little bit and technically still have the hand raised, right? So subtlety is a bit of that, about the amplitude of things. And so this is very important when it, you know, outside of the movement realm, but when we talk about focusing on smaller outcomes, okay, and increase therefore the opportunities for differentiation, which is that opportunity for the brain to notice difference and then to be able therefore to pick up on smaller parts. So let me give you an example in an infant. An infant, for example, can only open their hand, their palm, right? They can either have it open or they have it closed. They cannot move their fingers like they're playing the piano. They just don't have the connections and the differentiation, the smallness, the subtlety of the movement to be able to do that. Okay, so they start like that, but over time, through their experiences, then we're able to, for example, isolate an index finger. Then we're able to play a piano. And if we study enough and all of that and get highly differentiated, we may be able to be somebody like Beethoven in the case of piano. And so what this means is, just think about that example. If you want to be playing the piano, you have to start at the point of being able to open and close the hand. And so a lot of times with our kiddos, when we're trying to have them get help, or help them in a way to get a new skill, we kind of focus on the piano playing, and we don't do enough of the opening and closing the hand, and then being able to touch the tip of the index finger to the thumb, and being able to touch the tip of the pinky finger to the thumb, etc. So we make too big a jump. And so really this is what subtlety is about. And I don't have time here, but there's a whole story I can tell you in terms of how I worked with my son over 2.5 years really, and to be able to eat with a spoon. And it was all about this. And believe me, the focus was on getting him to get that spoon in his mouth in the beginning. And then just as I learned more, and it wasn't because I was a practitioner, I was a parent, but I was just as I'd have just reflection time on kind of these things with the essentials. And unfortunately it took me 2.5 years, because sometimes it was 5 months between a bright idea. But when it was me getting clear on how do I need to break down this activity and understand what are the 50 things that I'm actually taking for granted when I pick up a spoon and eat with it, then I could start to look on, oh my goodness, how do I work on one of these 50 things, for example, and then through that process be able to find a way where my son could notice a difference, and then other pieces came very quickly after that. Okay, so that subtlety, think of it maybe as well in terms of breaking down tasks. You may hear some rustling because I have to plug in my machine. Okay. Oh, this is okay. So the next piece, enthusiasm. So these will go more quickly, but enthusiasm is important because our brain amplifies and marks the experiences that we have, right? So you know that. So I think even Christy, you posted today about your excitement and celebration, therefore with Mateo saying a full sentence, right? So it's important. It's important. We mark it. So that's why when we're happy, we laugh. We often tell our kids, oh my gosh, like you did it, good job, etc. Right? So we do that because it's enthusiasm. You can see it in like a 2-year-old. I have a 2-year-old. He's typically developing, and he's like, Mama, I did it. For whatever it might be, like completely something that he figured, I don't know, some game that he invented, or whether it's like peeing in the toilet, right? But I did it. Like they know it, and you mark it with enthusiasm. So this is important. And I want to give a caveat here, but that's also very important. I just encourage you, be careful of the use of the word good. Just be careful, like as you're enthusiastic and you're marking things and you're naming it and celebrating that, just be careful on the word of we do it all the time, not just with kids with special needs, but good job, good boy, good girl. And it's the risk with this is just that there is the flip side of, okay, I do this, I'm good. So if I don't do it, I'm not good. We don't say that, but the implicit absence of it, therefore, it kind of can lead kids into that realm of thinking and a sense of failure. And this is not necessarily a conscious thing, but a subconscious thing over time. And in the case of a child with special needs, it's very important to not have that, because the ability to kind of reason your way out of that for yourself, either then or later, is impaired. Okay, so just something. So just when you mark things, like, just think of, I always just encourage the parents I work with, but just think of naming it. You know, oh, you pulled the peg off. You wrote your name. You know, so you express the emotion, the child will feel it, etc. But just name it, and that's good, and that's enthusiasm, and they get it. You know, just like the child that says, "I did it," right? He doesn't say, "I'm good, I did it." He just said, "I did it." So just something there on enthusiasm, but definitely enthusiasm helps mark the difference. Okay, so definitely a tool to use. Flexible goals. I'm going to just put this in this kind of lump with the example I gave earlier of breaking things down. But flexible goals. So this is, you know, it's important, as, again, depending on when your child is on the spectrum, it's an important distinction to help the child understand as well, because sometimes the child is trying to do that next big thing that he knows everybody expects him to do, or he sees his peers doing, or he wants to do. And again, and maybe the fact that at this moment in time he cannot do it can lead to frustration, sense of failure, shutting in, emotional issues, etc. So here, you know, you really want to build it in the child. And then as a parent, as a teacher, as a therapist as well, also important to have flexible goals. So, you know, have the goal, don't get me wrong, have that long-term goal, or, you know, I want the kid to walk. Yes, I want the kid to say a word. I want the kid to say a sentence, for example. We want that, of course. We want everything for these children. But realize that, you know, trying to force that action or do something very direct to get that action may not be the way. And so you can have other goals along the way that help build to that. And so this is an important part of ABM, and was a huge part of my decision to pursue this with my child, because I love this idea of meeting the children where they are. You know, it's about meeting the child where they are. It's not trying to fix the child. Really hard as a parent, really hard, because we want to do everything for our kids, right? We want to help them, we want them to be great, we want them to be healthy, etc. But this was a huge part about, like, being able to move the thinking from fixing the child to connecting with the child and seeing what they're doing, how are they doing it, and how can we work around that to just make one incremental change or shift. Again, think subtle. That might be, external people might call it small, who cares? But how, if we can help them to shift just a little bit, you know, and how can we set up goals around that? You know, the impact on the changes in the child and the child's sense of self can be huge. Learning switch. You know, when our brain is learning, we can change in so many directions. And if learning is not happening, this is another pitfall we often fall into as parents, teachers, therapists. Like, kind of, you just like stop what you're doing because it's not working. Like, you know, and I don't mean, you know, you just give up. I just mean like the way in which it's being asked for. If we're doing it again and again and again and again, there's a point at which, you know, asking again is not really going to be driving that child to be different, because they're not noticing the difference with that path. So change it up and find the moments when the learning switch is on. For a child with autism, a lot of times this could be something like everybody would know, and it's been very well talked about, but you know, you have to work with that child when the child's calm, right? If you're scared, if you feel unsafe, if you're crying, if you're extremely hungry, your brain doesn't have room for any of that other stuff. You know, it's kind of like, give it up. If you're extremely tired, right? This is why class times only run a certain length, for example, and there are optimal times for learning in terms of lengths of times before breaks. because we want that learning switch to be available. Imagination and dreams. So this is more applicable where we have, you know, again, depending on where you're on the spectrum, or for an adult, anybody, a typically developing person. But imagination and dreams are really powerful to build neural pathways. Just imagining something happening for the brain can be inputs to the brain like it's happening. So there are many examples of things like phantom pain. You know, you have pain in a limb that you don't even have anymore, because it's what is the brain perceiving as input. So this is a whole tool that can be used to help the brain as well be in learning mode. And awareness also kind of goes with learning switch, but when we're aware, our brain can work at a higher and higher level. And this is what happens with a typically developing child. They build awareness of themselves in space. They start to build awareness of their environment, and therefore how they interact with their environment, how they interact with others. And then we get into, you know, higher levels of operation of the brain when it comes to speech and executive decision making, and really that child being able to know that they have a say in the world and that they can have an impact on their life and on what happens around them. Okay, so that was really quick on the essentials. On the Facebook page, Anat Baniel Method, there are some podcasts. So started last year, February, I think, and I've started doing podcasts. So there is a podcast on slow, a podcast on subtle. So those are tools I encourage you to do that, to listen to it. I don't encourage you to try to listen to all of them in 1 week. My recommendation, I recommend this to my parents all the time, is take one essential. So for example, if you take slow, watch the podcast, read the book, and read the chapter in the book, reflect on it, and practice it. Like practice it for 2 or 3 weeks. Just try to see, like, you know, how could I build it in? Am I doing slow? I often ask people, like, maybe read the chapter first, and then after a week, then listen to the podcast, because you'll be in a different frame of thinking. But those are resources to find out more about each essential. And then in the podcast, Anat also answers questions that come in. So very useful tool and resource to also get some ideas maybe for your particular situation as well. Okay. So now I'll take like a few minutes just to kind of tell you my story too, because as I said, I am a special needs mother. My son Aslan is now 9, almost 10. He'll be 10 in July. And this is how I found ABM in the first place. When he was 9 months old, and it was Easter Sunday, so every Easter is really hard. Drink my water. But he started having infantile spasms. And this is a very debilitating type of seizure, in terms of you really want them to stop quickly, because they really tear up the connections in the brain. So very regressive, and they continue for a long time. So what that led to were, you know, all the testing, and we found out that he has brain malformations. To this day, we don't really know why. Nothing's come up genetically. So don't really know why. But that was kind of the reason for the issue. So at that point, he hadn't been, he was 9 months old, and he wasn't sitting and he wasn't crawling. The pediatrician wasn't worried. I don't know. I wasn't worried. I was here in the US with my baby. I did all the you know, everything, every well checkup, the vaccines. I did the checklist. As far as I know, he was doing the things I needed to be doing, except those 2 things. But I was like, okay, maybe just a little bit late. But at that point, it became clear that these were real delays. So what that meant then was that we had to find the specialist was like, okay, you have to do therapy. I'm like, okay, I don't know what that looks like. I mean, I get the concept, but I've never had experience of anybody who had to get physical therapy or occupational or speech therapy, for example. So I started literally in between counting seizures because there were hundreds a day and I had to log them. I was very thankful for YouTube, and I saw many things, some of which I looked at and I was like, no, 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 like why would you do that? I not with my child, kind of thing. And then others I was like, oh, that's interesting. Okay, I see how they do it, for example. And one of the videos I came across was a 3-minute video of Anat working with the kid over 3 years and her narrating basically through pictures. And the two things that hit me were, one, this sounds logical. It sounded logical that if we can kind of go after the brain and help the brain be better, then it would help everything. Versus like maybe trying to hit, 10 different things that might be wrong. Because there are many things wrong in that way with my child as in terms of the, what was going on physically and developmentally. And the second thing that really hit me was I want somebody to work with my kid in that way. And that way was the piece I said earlier in terms of flexible goals and subtle. So not forcing him, but meeting him where he is. And literally, honestly, that was it. Like after that, I went to the website a month later, and in 4 weeks, we were able to stop the seizures at that point in time anyway, thankfully. And so a month later, I was at a practitioner. I had to drive 3 hours to go see. We were there for 3 days to do intensive sessions. The next month, I was in California at a NOT center. I didn't see her, but worked with senior practitioners there. And that was kind of the beginning of our journey. That was in 2011. So summer 2011, and I've never looked back. So that is what, watching just how they worked with him and listening to them, I learned more. The book wasn't out yet, so I didn't have that resource at that time. But it was enough for me to just like see in my eyes at that time anyway, smaller and smaller changes with Aslan. And then I was able to meet other parents and hear their stories. And basically 8 months in, I was like, okay, I want to do this. I need to do this to help my son. And so I joined the Next Available Training Program. And very quickly, in the first segment I was there, realized that I needed to do this for me. So it's helped me as a parent to go through this journey as a special needs mom. And that I also wanted to be able to do this for other people. So I did all the levels of formal training that I could do with Anat, everything she has in the books. And I immediately, as soon as I finished my main training and could, I went back to help with trainings. And then I was asked a few years ago to be a teaching assistant. So I stay very, very close to the work. I have a practice in Houston. I traveled to LA, I traveled to Panama, and I also more recently traveled to Belize and give sessions. But it's a huge part of my life, not just for my son, but like I said, for me, and it's made a lot of changes. I did want to put up one slide. All right, 1 second. Just summarizing here, like how it helped me as a parent. And again, this started before I was a practitioner, just having my child in this process, and the more I understood the work and the essentials. But it really renewed my hope and it made me not give up on my child's potential. Very important. It helped me be calmer to know that he can and is developing. And that went along with me being able to appreciate and notice what I may have previously called small changes, or that people around me might have not even noticed or not considered big enough. But doing that, being able to see just the tiniest shifts allowed me to be enthusiastic, to celebrate, to know that he's changing, and to move out of a space where I was like just caught up on, or where I could have got caught up on, like despairing about, what he wasn't doing and what he might not do. The 9 essentials gave me a compass. I very much encourage every family to, think about it, spend some time reflecting on, and maybe you've done it already, but sometimes I have families come to me who have not. Like, reflect on the philosophy of how you want your child's development and support systems to be. There are different ways to do it. So think about that, because that will help you in the realm of considering so many different options that are out there and what you want to pursue, because you can't go after everything. We don't have the money or the time to go after everything. And then B, sometimes certain approaches can be contradictory. So I've seen parents who maybe do like 10 different things, but actually they're a bit contradictory in their approach. So for me, the 9 essentials just give me a compass. That is what I use to evaluate, like, yes, this, no, maybe, etc. This part on noticing that there's no big or small change. And importantly, the last part, which is giving me the ideas, at least the framework of thinking, and I have to, spend the time, come up with my own ideas, of course, but on how I could change my own approach with him. In, again, everything I was doing anyway, as a mother in daily life, and therefore spur his thinking and his development. So those are just some things that I wanted to mention there on that topic. Okay. I know were there any questions? No questions? Okay, reading the comments. I love the idea of meeting your child where they are, and I have to keep reminding myself there's just change. Yeah, change is change. So just on that point, change is change. Change means that there was a connection in the brain. Huge. Don't underestimate that. There was a connection in the brain. The brain doesn't care about big or small. And like literally, you have a neuron, and it's either they're talking, they're connected, or they're not. Like that's all the brain cares about. How those different connections come together and manifest and are integrated are a secondary thing. Okay? So celebrate the change. Any label of big change or small change, enough change, good enough, etc., are labels that we place. We outside the child, so we don't know their internal experience first of all, and we place those labels based on our own views, which is, another thing to watch a lot of times with kids with special needs. And I mean, I've been down this. I hit myself many times, and I'm sure I hit myself many times over. But one of the things that I have to keep asking myself, and I tell people to keep asking, because just what I learned through ABM. But sometimes we have to ask on some of the things we're asking for our children, or the timelines we're asking for, and we have to really pick that out and say, is it for the child, or is it for me? Is it so I'll be okay, I feel okay, I'll feel he's okay, or is it really for him? That's it's difficult. It's hard to do it, but it's just some of the things to reflect on and notice where we can make some shifts. And it kind of doesn't matter what we've done in the past. I tell people all the time, because going down the guilt road is very easy as a parent of kids with special needs on many levels. So not that we don't get to those moments, but try not to stay there. And just know, like, every second is a new opportunity for us to try something a little bit differently that could maybe make a difference for our kids. If someone is interested for therapy, how can they contact you? So I think, Christy, based on the posts on the page and the previous Facebook Lives, there will be a list of resources posted. So that is one way. You have my name in the poster, Alisa Franklin. I'm on Facebook, so you can Facebook me, for example, if you would like to contact me. And then we can chat through WhatsApp or something like that. Is there a recommended age range? Is it never too late? Never too late. That's the beauty of brain plasticity. And that's the myth that was debunked with neuroscience. Yes, if we can start earlier, because we can take advantage of the brain's earlier propensity, just genetically as human beings, to be in that kind of, faster time of connection making. If we can call upon that, that's great. The other piece that is helpful with starting earlier, but earlier is relative. So my point is, earlier started at 20 versus 80, is that just as we go through time, we learn what we learn. So we learn our experience. So the later that we wait, what we deal with then is just that there are other patterns that have been learned and that are strong, maybe in the system, and strong in the brain. So then what we're having to do then is learn new things for certain patterns that already exist, right? New options for certain patterns that already exist, versus maybe starting from like a lower playing field where these new things we're trying to introduce are just completely new, right? So that's kind of the piece. But that's the beauty of brain plasticity. So it doesn't matter how young or how old, and I say this, I'm even working with people who are 70, 80, 90 years old, and it doesn't matter how maybe damaged the brain is, as long as it's not dead, because there's really nothing we can do with that. But that's why even children with cerebral palsy, children with autism, even though we don't know why, but something's not working, the way that another child's brain may be working, for example. Stroke victims, other neuro conditions, primary lateral sclerosis, things like this, even in those situations, the brains can change. So it's the same concept, and it's the same theory. Perception of difference, make new connections, and let the brain do its amazing job. Okay. If there are no other questions, we'll see if they come through. But if any come through after, I can also just answer them by writing in the text box on the Facebook page. But yes, thank you for having me here. I know it's super quick and fast, too fast. But happy, like I said, continue the conversation. You can find me on Facebook, and there'll be the list. But I just asked for, one second. Can such connections in ABM be applied to children with studying and learning disabilities in school, and what techniques can be applied? Yes, for sure. So, there are children who maybe don't understand math very well, we've had children with dyslexia, other learning disabilities, maybe even diagnoses like ADHD, for example, that impact how they're learning in school. It's the same principles, so kind of the movement piece. So in those cases, if these children are maybe in a state where they can follow directions, for example, so you can literally employ them into movement lessons. So one way is one-on-one sessions, but there are also videos that can be followed. And the way they're built and the way in which you're asked to execute are such that they're following the essentials. So that is one thing to explore, and that we generally recommend with certain children like that. So if they can be doing the movement lessons, then this process is kind of taking place. And then when you you think of slow, you think of subtle, you think of variation, and it depends on the specific situation, right? But just kind of trying to brainstorm and really think of ways to employ those essentials and that thinking can help elicit changes that then you see in outcomes in terms of how they are in school. Okay. So for the parents, and then also just for the other support folks and teachers, therapists, etc. Just keep high expectations for your children. Keep high expectations. I've even fallen into that trap times, and sometimes my child does something and I'm like, oh, and I realize like I didn't think he could do that. I didn't expect him to do that, and then I have to just make kind of be like, hey, I need to check this because I need to have I have high expectations for my child, and it's very delayed. And for my child, he didn't walk till he was 6, and he still can't walk half a mile or anything like that. And he doesn't speak. But it's kind of holding him to high expectations and making sure that not because a child is younger or because a child has special needs, like we completely take over everything for them. So just have those high expectations, and then that way we kind of keep a gap for ourselves in terms of like, hey, we have to keep our thinking going, keep our idea generation going. And we also have to make sure as parents, especially, that we're holding the people working with our kids or in their lives also to have high expectations of that child. Okay? Very important, especially with special needs. And I can tell you, seeing it in the US, and there are special needs classes and classrooms, and there are certain things they're having some kids do that like the child is way beyond that, like cognitively. But just because they're fine motor, is not like they're having them do some mundane task that really makes no sense for that child to be doing. Because they're where they could be advancing and helping the brain notice things that would then manifest maybe in fine motor, is they're way beyond that. So just high expectations. And with that, so then that change is possible. It's generally not overnight. Sometimes the changes like we see in ABM or sessions can be super quick, like in a weekend or a day, like, the kids start doing something completely different. But generally for our kids, as it's a longer wavelength. But just know that it's about, we just have to figure out the how. So high expectations, and just know that we just have to figure out the how, and just have the conviction that you will, that we will, and that keeps us going and helps us, create possibilities for our kids, and just know that they can get there. Okay, as we go through this journey. All right. Well, so with that, thank you very, very much. I very much appreciate the opportunity to speak to you, and I look forward to hearing from you. Bye.